We have questions.
We have
Where will storage come from?
Right, okay, we have questions. Thank you. The question now coming in is, where will storage come from? So we've heard, blue this, green that, and batteries. So where will storage come from? Who wants to open that? Duncan.
I'll try and open it if that's all right, Ian, and try and put it into context. I mean, storage is massively important. I mean, I think with solar and wind, we've got the lowest cost of generation that's going. So it's the answer to climate change, and it gives you the answer to the trilemma. You've got local generation, so security of supply. You've got the lowest cost, and it's zero carbon. But there is still an issue around what happens when the wind doesn't blow for 6 days. So you need somewhere to store it. Batteries will do you a couple of hours, 4 hours, something like that. Maybe you can put it into heat, but the big hope really is around hydrogen, and that could be blue hydrogen, Mike, or it could be green hydrogen. I think the FES studies are really good. NGC have done tremendous work, I think, in the future energy scenarios, and you kind of got 4 scenarios. You've got the steady progression, which is a bit of waffling around and not really getting anywhere. You've got consumer transformation, which is, I think, what you would really like, Irene, sort of consumers doing an awful lot more and reacting to prices more than before. System transformation, which is really around blue hydrogen, and then you've got leading the way, which is green hydrogen and lots more of everything, and that's the one that gets you there the fastest. So that scenario I find really interesting, because you've got a lot of, you've got in the different scenarios 30 to 60 gigawatts of solar build, 30 to 60 gigawatts of wind blow, and you've got, the demand on the system goes from 60, say, to 90 gigawatts. So what do? You've got to store that energy somewhere, so make it into hydrogen. That's one way, but you need some form of getting there as well, and earlier, maybe blue hydrogen. You've got these clusters, and you can join the clusters together to take the carbon dioxide out and stick it in a big hole somewhere. So maybe a combination of the two. Dogger bank, bringing green hydrogen in, and then carbon dioxide going out into holes in the ground, and possibly even things like green ammonia coming in from the Sahara. Big solar projects making green ammonia and then bringing it in by ship to different countries. But hydrogen is, we suspect, is the answer, but there's a lot we need to do to make this all work.
I'd like to add to what Duncan said.
Irene.
I don't think there's any disagreement in the role of hydrogen as an energy carrier, and I also see, as you said, the blue hydrogen being the interim stage to more green hydrogen. I think, though, that there's a trend which is, I think, incentivized by the regulation that are coming into place around, and the incentives around, the EVs uptake. Residential batteries, we're not seeing it necessarily this much in the UK, but we are seeing in other markets. So we need to also take account of the time of response in terms of flexibility of different types of storage. So whilst the hydrogen is going to fulfill the role of an energy storage with different purpose to that storage deployment, but the batteries, to me, are going to, whether we expect it more on the commercial C&I space or the residential, but we foresee residential batteries playing a big role, because it's a bit like, are we going to have ICE engines anymore? Well, EVs are going to dominate whether we like it or not, because they're going to be more affordable. So that storage element from batteries and EVs, it's how we unlock that potential, but no doubt on the role of hydrogen too. It's just for different purpose, perhaps, in terms of balancing and playing into the markets, as Alastair was saying before.
If I could just jump in, there are many different colours of hydrogen, and I probably lean towards those who would rather just go straight to green and don't want to get stuck on blue. I lean that way. There is space for others. Beyond, hydrogen is hydrogen, whatever colour you store it in the same way. Grid scale storage of hydrogen is not a massive technical challenge. It's very doable. Other things around storage. You're talking about 25 million electric vehicles, and when you work that out, that's a heck of a lot of storage.
Absolutely.
I'm aware of the vehicle to grid technologies that people are trialling. Again, You know, we're there too. We've been involved in that too. But actually, you almost don't need that. In fact, you don't absolutely need that, because vehicles charging and choosing when they charge already creates the storage you need to balance peaks and troughs, to make sure that things like Hinkley C, you have something to do overnight, even if it's windy and not terribly cold. And the volume there can absorb an awful lot. I would also have a little fondness for the idea that some of the other technologies, long-term storage technologies, might find a breakthrough application, which they don't have yet, and that's why they haven't got anywhere near getting down their cost curve. So the other technologies that don't get much of a look in, I wonder if emergency power might be the killer app for them when we finally realise that we need something other than standby diesels to fill that gap.
You're talking about things like liquid air and...
Well, actually not so much, because that's a bit of a big technology for that. But there are lots of different chemistries. So liquid air, I think of as more of a larger scale T-site kind of a application. I could be wrong about that. But there are other technologies out there, and if they can get through one particular niche, they will broaden out and they will improve the scope of storage that we can do. Thermal storage is bigger than you think. One thing that probably bothers me is that in the market that we've had up to now, we haven't been able to provide a business case for people like data center developers to include ice storage or phase change storage in their data centers. If that was distributed around that particular industry, you would have a heck of a lot of responsiveness without any lithium involved at all.
Interesting. So,
Just one thing to briefly add to that. I agree with all that's been said. You need to move from just shorter duration storage that you've got with lithium-ion batteries to the longer duration storages. But something that's been really interesting, which I picked up from the COP26 discussions, is that longer duration storage, as Alastair said, is not doing well on the economics at the moment. It's not stacking up yet. However, there are lots of countries looking at it where they don't have a developed grid. And so it could be that longer duration storage takes off in other countries first where there isn't a developed grid, and then it moves over here once it's moved down the cost curve and you've got the economies of scale. So one to watch, I think.
Yeah, I think I would completely agree with that. Like, hydrogen, I think, can be a very good solution long term, but I don't think it's necessarily given. I think if we're thinking about using hydrogen for power flexibility, there's like sort of a lot of other things hydrogen can be doing in that time, and just the volumes of hydrogen we would need to provide that power flexibility is pretty enormous. And so yeah, but then it is a question then of if could anything else fill that gap, and if it doesn't, then hydrogen will have to. But yeah, I think long duration storage technologies, so we've seen kind of liquid air, but also kind of iron air batteries, which have the capability to get really cheap, but they just need to be deployed at scale to see if they can come down cheaply, because I think the only way those kind of technologies will work is if they do become super cheap, because we're with lithium ion. I think the reason why it's doing so well is because we've got this kind of external driver of that cost coming down. We've got electric vehicles being built, but also we've got technology that fits into what is being used today. So it's like quite high cycling. You're doing stuff every single day. You're generating value. Whereas if you're going to have a unit which is sat there for 2-3 weeks doing nothing, it's just kind of it's charged up. It's just waiting for a period to discharge. Then that the cost needs to be so much cheaper. And yeah, whether we get there, I'm not sure, but I don't think it's a given that hydrogen will.
I think
well, you've triggered Duncan there.
I think the thing I'm thinking is I find it utterly astounding that we're talking about in a few years' time that the whole of our gas grid runs on hydrogen. I mean, that is utterly amazing that change could happen, be it blue or be it green. But the reason I don't think batteries work is they have an important role, don't get me wrong, in providing that fast flexibility that you need to keep the system running at 50 hertz and not digressing and falling over. It has a big role there. You do need some sort of zero carbon inertia to go along with it. But just look at the maths. I mean, you need so much lithium ion cells to provide that amount of energy to step in it has to be another source. It has to be something. And hydrogen seems to be the only thing that can do that, because you want the batteries there for feathering the system and a couple of hours storage, but it can't step in for 5 days.
But
5 times 24 hours times,
I think
10, 20 gigawatts, that's a lot.
I'll just quickly say, I don't think building, I completely agree, like building more and more lithium-ion storage is not going to be the answer. So yeah.
We've already heard that there's, I think Alastair said there's going to be 20 to 25 million, half-ton battery packs, giving about, each with about 50, I think this is the national grid, numbers 50 kilowatt hours of flex available at 7 kilowatts for each one. If you do the maths on that, you do get a pretty big number.
You do.
It is big.
You do. And
I think Duncan's point was about the 5-day time horizon.
It doesn't last long enough.
It doesn't last long
There's
enough.
plenty of power for a short duration, but it doesn't last so long. But the thermal storage is interesting though, because the big choice is with the domestics whether they use hydrogen for heating at home or whether they use heat pumps. And if they use heat pumps, that creates a lot of distributed demand side management, which is extremely useful, extremely powerful, and you've got a lot of sort of thermal time switching that you can use in that system. So that creates a huge amount of flexibility, and it'd be interesting to see which of those scenarios comes out, which one of those two.
Yeah, absolutely. And I waved the flag earlier against a wider ADE point. We waved the flag for networked heat pumps, and one of the reasons we do that, not only because they can access ambient heat rather than really chilly winter day snowy heat from an air source, but also because you can have the storage on the network in a bulkier, bigger way. It's quite cheap than having individual storage in your house. Do you want a final comment on?
I just think that I picked up on what Alastair said before about the EVs and the fact that you may not need V2Gs, you can have all these masses of storage, but I think we, especially ADE, stakeholders should absolutely push and encourage the debate around dynamic tariffs. I think dynamic tariffs is going to absolutely be essential to move to enable that flexibility, which moves away from just shifting the peak problem to a later hour of the day. We need to have, when I say I believe in transactivity, it's exactly that, because if you have dynamic tariffs which are technology aided so that the consumer adheres to those without even feeling burdened by those, you're going to also be able to flex. You're going to be able to have different nodes that actually help each other trading, whether they've got excess flexibility, whether it's consumption that goes down, whether it's excess energy that goes on grid. But if you don't have dynamic tariffs really taken to what Alastair was saying, the half-hourly settlement has to become a thing. It has to come from, the market needs to get there, and we need to push for that to happen, because that will then allow the long-term storage to play its role, but also the short-term storage to actually really become a distributed form of flexibility in real time. There's not much debate on half-hourly tariffs. These agile tariffs which are enticing, and then you get to find out that consumers are actually not saving anywhere near what's advertised, because the technology just isn't there to help them do that.
No, it's a great point. We haven't, and in the AD we have a lot of challenger suppliers and indeed incumbent suppliers, the more progressive ones that are trying to offer this sort of dynamic tariff to domestic level to drive this, and we do quite a lot of work with them. They're not here on the panel because this is pure flex providers, but the suppliers are working. We're working quite hard with them to try and make that a viable offering for domestic consumers. Like you say, it will unlock quite a lot of capacity. Yes, that was the first question. Where's the flex coming from? We're not going to have time to do. We've got quite a few. We've got about 10 questions coming. We're going to have to pick one. I'm going to go for quite a techie one next. We've got, how do we keep a zero carbon system stable?
But that's
Alastair.
okay. So you've got the system operator not that long ago, but committed to zero carbon operation by 2025. They then, everyone shouted, "But where's your plan?" They then came out with a plan. They're now doing the plan, all the way from the IT to the contracts to there's lots of things in that. Among them are synchronous compensators, synchronous condensers. that help out with the geekier ends of stability around voltage management, around inertia, around fault level, and these things that only make sense to power engineers. And you go from there all the way out to active trading in markets. I'm not going to say it's not a challenge. It is a challenge, but it's one where the maps have been drawn and we're already marching. It is absolutely not the biggest puzzle now that we face. The previous question around long-term storage, that's a bigger puzzle. The hydrogen question, that's a huge puzzle. This one, I'm just going to do it.
Let's see if anyone might disagree with that. So Alastair's saying the ESO's nailed it. It's a done deal. Duncan.
I think there's a couple of things that need sorting out. First, this is really quite techie, really. So hopefully I'll get this right. One is rock off, right? Rate of change of frequency on the system. So at 0.125 hertz, you're supposed to be at 50 hertz plus or minus 1%. You've got 4 seconds to fix a problem currently. Now the thing is we need to make long-term investments in kit that deals with inertia. So first of all, there isn't a market for inertia, and second, these are 30-year assets. So tell us please what the rock-off limits are going to be in 10, 20 years' time. The problem is it's a really difficult problem for the system operator, because they don't know how well the market will evolve and how it will respond between using frequency and inertia to deal with this. So it's very difficult for them to set rock-off limits going into the future, which is needed for the investment. But more simply, we need a market for inertia. At the moment, energy and inertia are mixed together. So to manage the rock-off, it's a function of the frequency on the system and your largest in-feed loss. So Hinkley, big system, if it falls off, the frequency will dump really quickly. So you need something to respond very, very quickly in order to deal with it. And what happens at the moment with the interconnectors overnight, they run them down to manage the rock-off limits, and they run them down and then bring on gas engines so that you've got more inertia. Now, the way to deal with, so what that does, it mixes up energy and inertia. You want a separate market for the two, and therefore people who want to invest in inertia can get a signal to decide how they're going to do it. At the moment, unless you get a long-term contract from the system operator, you don't know what your prices are going to be once that contract ends.
Please, for separate markets.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting about the development of inertia markets. I mean, grid, I think that at the moment of the tender rounds, they're offering 7-year contracts. And that would go some way to solving the problem in the immediate future. And then beyond that, you could see the markets developing. So I'm kind of leaning towards Alastair's view, where we're kind of we know what the solution is, and we're
so
getting there.
So what you do after your 7 years, you built this asset, unless you got your money back in 7 years, what are you going to do?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It'd be interesting to see how much spinning mass there is in the system. Now, if you use certain electronics with wind turbines, you can get spinning mass from that. The Whitetail project we're talking about will have a spinning mass. So I think that there might be enough spinning mass.
I hear different opinions from
cool,
different
engineers
on that.
That's fine. That's good. That's why we've got these people are prepared to invest and build stuff on a 7-year contract.
I think I kind of partly agree with Evan, really. Like the ESO is being very progressive on kind of moving the market forward. It's quite clear by creating these markets, we will see solutions come through. I would say, like, on the inertia point, I think the focus has to be on the rock-off point, not necessarily on needing physical inertia, because then you come up with different solutions. It might be like kind of dedicated, like, flywheels or synchronous condensers, but we could also see, grid-forming inverters come through, like using the power electronics capability, which really it is there. It's just it's not being used right now. So as long as kind of these different technologies can compete, then we'll get the best solution, and I think we'll get there quicker.
Yes. Wow, we've gone into pretty geeky stuff. Synchronous condensers.
I'm more agreeable with what has just been said. I think we're going to have a power electronics dominated grid, and I think that as well as
that's synthetic inertia.
Absolutely, synthetic inertia, and I think that as well as having a need for a market for inertia, I think sounding like a broken record again, I think we can't ignore the distribution network now playing an active role.
Absolutely.
So far it's been clearly due to the non-decentralized system. We had this transmission network that played the role, and that was where it ended. We need to absolutely believe into the possibility of this reverse bottom-up approach where the synthetic inertia coming from the distribution network, it's a matter of where is the technology that is going to do it in inertial timescale. Well, we believe that smart transformer that we've developed is definitely going to do it. Whether it's going to be the unique technology, I hope so, but I'm a firm believer that the distribution network is the one that is going to help balance the system, and synthetic inertia is the thing.
But some massive, massive changes need to be made on the distribution side, because it's kind of like clunky 1950s technology, as you were saying.
Yeah.
You can't see what the hell's going on because
But-
it's not.
But this
But
is
you
what-
can
but
with
but
the-
you
with
can-
the Ampex
you can
probe.
with you can with the smart transformer. It's
Other members
actually
are
a drop-in replacement within existing substation, which is a massive, again, hurdle otherwise to be overcome, because the distribution network operator aren't going to build new substations to accommodate new technology. They don't want to retrofit because downtime is expensive. So it's a matter of devising technology which is fit for purpose, but also fit for, future-proofing the system is about seeing what the problem is even ahead of time. We need sensors, we need to see what's going on, but we also need to harness that synthetic inertia in the timescales that are needed for flexibility.
In your presentation, you had, so was it 10% penetration for smart?
Well, if just thinking of 10% penetration of the distribution grid with smart transformers, you get to, the equivalent of today probably 6 to 10 CCGTs, depending on power rating. It's inertial timescales that, again, is what's needed for balancing. So I do believe that it's a matter of also being brave enough from a network operator's point of view to innovate and to embrace the technology. And where is the regulator playing a role there? Is Ofgem needs to encourage the DNOs embracing and adopting technology and providers
Ofgem,
like
are you
us.
listening?
Ofgem, are you listening?
Ofgem, are you
Yes.
The question I have with that, though, is how much more interaction will there need to be between the SO and
Yes.
the DNOs? I mean, if we can't see at the moment, can the ESO see? How will they be able to see if
That
we've
is
got
a
power
really-
electronics?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I mean, there's so much going on down in the DNO system. So sort of somewhere between 7 to 30 gigawatts by 2050 of embedded solar at domestics. Most of whom are going to have batteries, because there'll be so much utility scale solar that the price of electricity at noon is going to be zero with that much solar on the system. You've got smart EVs and V2G, which gives you sort of 25 going down to 12, coming out the other way, and then potentially also you've got something like 50 gigawatts of domestic heating going on as well. So that's a vast amount of flexibility. And at the moment, what you've got is, okay, we're moving away from this with the charging review that's going on. You've got red, green and amber rates, which are really clunky, so for 3 years. And now we're talking about demand-dominated areas and generation-dominated areas, but what we haven't said is over what time period. Are we talking about a season? Are we talking about a day? Are we talking about an hour?
Yes.
And what you could have in the end is actually almost sort of subnodal prices. Ofgem's analysis was around 800, about 132 kV bulk supply points, but you could have a whole series of separate marketplaces, 800 or even more nodal marketplaces for energy. At the moment, we've got one for the whole of the UK. You could have several hundred, several thousand of them, and maybe also something around inertia in each market as well.
Are
It
you
just goes to show the scale of what will have to change. to
Are
enable
you
these
plumbed
standards.
into the Ofgem full chain flexibility work?
I
could
not
do-
personally, no.
They
but
could do with hearing some of this,
Yes.
and they are open to it. They know it's a big challenge.
It is, and it's a challenge for all of us, really, to make these things happen. We can't do it in isolation. We need to work together
Absolutely.
to solve these problems.
But we've got some of the solutions here. And we've only probably got time for one more question, actually. We've got quite a few. Might do two, because this one might miss the point. But we haven't got a representative of pure domestic flex here. But as flex providers active in the market, how big do you think it's going to be? How can we make sure that it works, it's intelligible and appealing to the domestic customer?
How did you say you've not got domestic?
Okay.
I mean, I've been talking about how important that residential flex is. I think the biggest hurdle is to make sure that the consumer has it absolutely easy to embrace and doesn't feel, that is being overtaken by the technology itself. So we've developed this user-centric approach where the user is actually catered for in his preferences, but he can always be in control, he can override, and it has to be absolutely seamless in managing it for the consumers. It's a bit like the mobile phone. You just sign up to a contract, you're given your mobile phone, you don't have to worry about anything else. You got access to service. So it's energy as a service, but with
How
user
big do you think it's going to be? What's Alice going to unlock for us then?
Well, you've seen my stats at the beginning of the presentation. I mean, 20 gigawatts of currently monetizable flex across Europe, and that's actually 10% of all the DR. So it's going to play a massive role. I don't want to put a number on it, but I think it's a need for us to believe that residential flex has to play a role. So.
Yeah. I think it's going to be, the question on the heat side is how many homes get heat pumps, because that's where the flexibility at domestic scale is going to be for on the heating side. Where district energy is the solution, then clearly the flexibility happens at the energy centre, and that's fine. And you can make a similar argument about hydrogen and electrolysers. So that's a policy question. How big is it? Is how big is the heat pump sector going to be? On electric vehicles, it's going to be about the size of the number of homes that have driveways. It's about that big. Now, what is that, 10 million? So
about half, I think.
Yeah, so I think there is a real question that needs to be answered probably by the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, and it's not as if they're ignoring this question, they know all about it, which is people who park on street. And if you park on street, you've got, even if you electrify every lamppost or whatever it is that you do, or put these little curb-mounted things, there's more contention for charging. And if there's more contention for charging, there's less flexibility or less tolerance by the users for being flexed. And that could mean that the networks, lamppost electricity supplies are not beefy. And so there could be less ability for those to flex, and therefore more stress on those networks, as opposed to the actual ones that feed the homes, where flexibility is absolutely, I think, going to be the default. I think that anybody who has an EV charge point in their home is going to hook up with something that's to do with flexibility. I think that from our point of view, we won't do the same thing that Irene is describing. We will the interface with the user. We have partner organisations that will do that because they specialise in that. They know how to work an app. They know how to do settlement. They know how to incentivise, reward, engage. We are in the background. Our expertise is in looking at the flexibility that's there and monetising it. We face the industry, not the consumer. And that division of labour, if you like, is quite important to us, because it means that bit gets done right without us having to become experts in it. But as to the size, EV size, it's the size of the number of homes with driveways. I think it's smaller.
That's right. I mean, the low-hanging fruit is electric vehicles and the heat pumps, and the business models need to deal with that, and it's channels to market that's the issue there, I think.
Yeah, and I think I would quite strongly agree with Irene that a lot of what you sort of need to build is just that trust from the consumer. Like, yes. We've seen it with the sort of vehicle to grid project that, people don't want to see like the fanciest possible optimization you come up with what an electric vehicle can do when it's plugged in from 6 p.m. until 6 a.m. in the morning. They just want to kind of see it doing what they think is best.
Yes.
And that is kind of most important there. I mean, if we go back a very long way in the history of open energy, it started with the idea of using domestic refrigeration to provide frequency response. That is literally where, it's not even open energy, RL Tech started from. And that, in theory, that's a good idea. That's something that some very smart person came up with. But it hits that point of people don't want their fridges turning on and off. And this was literally a newspaper article, I think maybe like 2008. It was talking about Big Brother fridges. Yeah. And instantly that killed that entire thing. And so it's all about the building up that trust. So consumers actually, are happy having things in their homes.
Just have a final question. So we've only got a few seconds left, but you're closest to this. What do you think, Irene, the biggest hurdle is to unlocking behind the meter?
If we, for a minute, put on the side consumer trust, which is possible to be overcome, it's open standard. We need appliances to have open standard protocol. We know BASE is working on public specifications, availability across different devices. We just need to become technology agnostic. We can't have platforms that need bipartisan agreements with OEMs because that would limit which users, which consumers are going to be able to provide flex, because you are only going to do it with certain brands of certain things. You need to be able to have open standard approach.
So we're not wasting our time with the ADE on this PAS
No, you're not.
1879.
So we need, I agree, we need regulatory stability so people can invest with confidence.
And that's at a domestic level, and I think
Yeah.
perhaps at your level as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.